The first thing you need to understand is that trained soldiers do not invent reasons to be afraid. They are trained, specifically and repeatedly, to do the opposite, to strip fear down to its mechanical parts, to identify the source, to name it, to act on it, or discard it. Fear, in the military context, is a workflow problem. You locate it, you classify it, you resolve it, or you file it and move on. So when 4 men, independently, across 3 different sections of a dead shopping mall in the American Midwest, exposed to no threat, fired upon by no one, confronted by nothing they could photograph or point a weapon at, when these 4 men, years later, exposed to no continuing danger, sitting in their own homes, in their own lives, still occasionally glance over their shoulders for no reason they can name, that is not fear. That is something else. That is a residue of having been seen by something that should not have had eyes. I am going to tell you what happened inside that building. I am going to tell you slowly, because it happened slowly, and because the slowness is part of what makes it what it is. This is not a story with a creature in it. There is no moment where something lunges from the dark. If you are waiting for that moment, you will wait forever, the same way the men inside that building waited forever, the same way they are, in some sense, still waiting. What I'm going to tell you is a story of a night when a building that was certified empty, cleared twice by professionals, occupied for 9 days by 40 armed men, a building with no history, no story, no reason to be anything other than concrete and steel and dead air, decided, for reasons it did not share, to pay attention. And the men noticed, and the building knew they noticed, and nothing happened. That is a horror of this story. Nothing happened. Nothing needed to happen. Whatever was in that building did not need to act. It only needed to look. And looking, it turned out, was enough. 2424, this is 2 actual. Say again your last. 2 actual, we are at the East Anchor, 2nd deck, North Corridor. We have movement. Repeat, we have movement. 24, confirm contact. A pause, long enough that the squad leader on the other end of the radio reached up and adjusted his headset, the way a man does when he wants to believe the equipment is the problem. 2 actual negative contact. We have movement, not the same thing. That distinction, movement, not contact, is not language a fire team leader uses casually. It is a language a man uses when he has seen something move and cannot tell you what moved it. The radio traffic from that night was logged, the way all radio traffic in a domestic deployment is logged. Most of it is mundane. Time hacks, position checks, a request for water, a complaint about a flashlight battery. But somewhere in the middle of a 4-hour interior sweep of a closed regional shopping mall, in the second week of a state-activated National Guard support mission, the tone of the traffic changes. It does not become panicked. It becomes careful. The men begin choosing their words. By the end of the night, 3 separate fire teams will independently report the same thing, in slightly different words, from 3 different parts of the building. None of them will see each other do it. None of them will know, until the after action, that anyone else had reported anything at all. And the building, according to every official document concerning that deployment, was empty. I want to be careful with this one, because it is the kind of story that invites embellishment, and embellishment is the fastest way to lose the actual texture of what happened. This is not a haunted mall story. I want to say that at the front. The men involved do not use that word. They do not use any of the words that the internet uses. What they describe, when they describe it all, is something closer to procedural failure, a sweep that they could not complete to their own satisfaction, in a building that should have presented no difficulty, under conditions that should have produced no ambiguity. The deployment itself is a matter of public record. In the broad strokes, a Midwestern state activated several National Guard companies during a period of civil unrest in the late spring of a year I will not name here, because the men who spoke to me did so on condition that the specific city not be identified. The mall in question had been closed for roughly 18 months at the time of the activation. It was structurally intact. Power was partial. Water was off. The anchor stores had been emptied. The interior storefronts were mostly gated, some still stocked, some bare. The building was being used, in the loose institutional sense, as a staging and rest point for guard units rotating off downtown perimeter duty, because it had parking, it had cover from weather, and it had enough interior square footage to bed down a company in shifts without quartering them in private homes or hotels. The interior sweeps were a formality. The building had been cleared by local law enforcement before the guard moved in. The guard re-cleared on their own arrival, as is doctrine, and then, because the mission extended, they re-cleared again at the beginning of the second week, a routine secondary sweep, the kind of task assigned to keep junior NCOs sharp and to put eyes in corners that had been quiet for a while. That second sweep is the one that did not go normally. I have spoken, over the course of about a year, with 4 men who were inside the building that night. 2 were riflemen. 1 was a team leader. 1 was a platoon medic, who was not on the sweep itself, but who was in the central atrium acting as casualty collection point, and who heard most of the radio traffic in real time. Their accounts agree on the broad shape of the night. They disagree, in small ways, on details that I will point out as we go, because the disagreements are part of the story. What none of them disagree on is this. At some point during that sweep, the building stopped feeling empty, and none of them can tell you exactly when. The platoon had been in the building for 9 days when the second sweep was ordered. By that point, the interior had developed a kind of soft, lived-in rhythm that any military element develops in any structure it occupies for more than 72 hours. Cots were arranged along the east wall of the central atrium, beneath the skylights, because the skylights gave natural light during the day and the men preferred to sleep where they could see weather. The food point was set up near what had been a coffee kiosk on the ground level. The platoon CP was on the second deck, in what had been a cell phone store, because the glass walls gave good sight lines down both corridors, and the back room still had functional electrical outlets running off the building's reduced power feed. The men had developed routes. The shortest path from the cots to the latrine trailers outside the south entrance. The shortest path from the CP to the food point. The path the smokers used, out through a service corridor near the old food court, because it dumped them onto a loading dock where they could light up without being seen from the street. These routes were not formal. Nobody drew them on a map. But within a few days, they had become the grain of the building, the way grain develops in any occupied space. What the men also developed, without anyone naming it, was a set of places they did not go. The medic, I will call him Reyes, because that is close enough to his actual name without being it, described this to me first, and he described it almost apologetically, as if he were not sure he should bring it up. There were spots, he said, where guys just stopped going. Nobody told them not to. They just stopped. The most obvious one was the upper level of the West Wing, where a department store anchor had been gutted before the closure. The space was large, partially lit by emergency lighting on a secondary circuit, and structurally fine. There was no operational reason to avoid it, but by the end of the first week, the men were taking the long way around it. If a route from point A to point B passed through the West Wing upper concourse, the men used the lower concourse instead, even if it added 3 minutes to the walk. Reyes noticed it because he was a medic, and medics notice movement patterns. He mentioned it to the platoon sergeant, casually, the way you mention a small thing. The platoon sergeant said he had noticed it too. They did not make anything of it. They filed it under the long list of small irrationalities that any unit develops in any building, and they moved on. The second sweep was ordered on the evening of the 9th day, after the company commander rotated through and observed correctly that the platoon had become comfortable. Comfort in a domestic deployment is the enemy of vigilance. The order came down in the standard way. 3 fire teams. Interior re-clear. Top to bottom, west to east, 90 minutes estimated. Report back to CP at completion. The team stepped off at 2200. The first irregularity was reported by Team 1, which had drawn the West Wing. Team 1 was led by a sergeant I will call Boyd. Boyd was, by every account I gathered, the most boring and reliable team leader in the platoon. He had been in the Guard for 11 years. He worked in civilian life as a regional manager for a logistics company. He was not a man given to imagination. The other men respected him in the slightly exasperated way that disciplined men respect even more disciplined men. Boyd's team entered the West Wing at the upper level by the access stairs near the parking deck. They moved through the gutted anchor first, because the open floor space made it the easiest part of the clear. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. The space was empty down to the concrete. They moved out of the anchor and into the upper concourse, the one the platoon had been unconsciously avoiding all week. The concourse was lit by the secondary emergency circuit, which produced a low, even, slightly yellow light. The storefronts on either side were gated. Some were empty. Some still had merchandise behind the gates. A shoe store with display shoes still on the wall. A jewelry kiosk stripped of inventory, but with a velvet display pad still in place. A children's clothing store with mannequins still dressed. Boyd told me later that he noticed the mannequins because one of his men noticed them first. "Sergeant," the man said, "the mannequins." Boyd looked. The mannequins in the children's store were arranged in a tableau. A family group, mother, father, 2 children, the way they had presumably been arranged for the last business day before the mall closed 18 months earlier. They were facing the gate. They were facing out toward the concourse. That was not the irregularity. The irregularity was that one of the children's mannequins, the smaller of the 2, was not facing the same direction as the others. It was turned, perhaps 15 degrees, toward the team. Boyd is, again, not a man given to imagination. He considered and rejected a number of possibilities. A passing maintenance crew, a previous sweep that had bumped the display, a child in the building before the closure, vibration from the HVAC, although the HVAC had been off for over a year. He filed the observation in the part of his mind where small unexplained things go, and he moved his team on, 50 meters down the concourse. The team passed a department store window display that had a similar mannequin arrangement. Boyd, now slightly attentive, looked at the mannequins. They were facing the concourse, in a neutral retail display posture. One of them was wearing a winter coat, out of season, because the store had closed in winter, and the coat hood was up. Boyd told me he stopped, because something about the posture had bothered him, and he wanted to look at it long enough to understand what. He could not articulate, later, what had bothered him. He stood in the concourse for perhaps 30 seconds, looking at the mannequin in the winter coat. His team waited. The light did not change. Nothing in the display moved. After 30 seconds, Boyd told his team to continue, and they continued. It was only after they had cleared the rest of the concourse, descended to the lower level, and begun the lower west wing sweep, that Boyd realized what had bothered him about the mannequin. The hood had been up, but mannequins in retail displays do not generally have their hoods up because the hood obscures a face, and the face is what sells a garment. He keyed his radio and called the CP. 2 actual, this is 2-1. Be advised, possible signs of recent entry in the West Wing upper concourse. No personnel, no contact. Recommend a secondary look in daylight. The CP acknowledged. Boyd's team continued their sweep. Team 2 had drawn the central section, which included the food court, the central atrium service corridors, and the upper-level offices that had once been the mall management suite. Team 2 was led by a corporal I will call Linders. Linders was younger than Boyd, less experienced, but competent. His team consisted of himself and 2 riflemen, one of whom, I will call him Park, is one of the 4 men I spoke with for this account. Park described the first part of the sweep as uneventful. The food court was empty. The service corridors behind the food court were empty. The walk-in coolers in the back of one of the restaurants were open and dry, smelling faintly of the chemical residue of long-evaporated cleaning product. They cleared the corridor, moved up the back stairs to the management suite, and began clearing the offices. The management suite had been left in a state of partial occupation. Some offices were stripped. Others still had furniture. One had a calendar on the wall, frozen on a month a year and a half earlier. Another had a coffee mug on the desk, dry, with a hard ring of dried coffee at the bottom. In the third office they cleared, Park noticed that the desk chair was warm. He stopped, and he put his hand on the seat of the chair, and he held it there. The chair was not warm in a way that could be confidently described as warm. It was, perhaps, less cold than the surrounding air. It was, perhaps, the temperature a chair would be if a person of average body heat had been sitting in it 45 minutes earlier and had then walked away. Park did not say anything immediately. He looked at Linders, who was clearing the far corner of the office. He looked at the chair. He took his hand off the seat. He put his hand back on the seat. He could no longer tell whether it was warm or not, because his own hand had been on it long enough to confuse the measurement. He told Linders. Linders came over and put his hand on the seat. Linders said he could not tell. They looked at each other for a moment. The way men look at each other when they are trying to decide whether to put something on the radio. Linders chose not to put on the radio. He told Park to mark the office, and they would come back to it. They marked the office with a small chem light on the door handle, the standard improvised marker, and they continued the sweep. In the fifth office, Park noticed that one of the desk drawers was open by perhaps 2 inches. He did not touch the drawer. He pointed at it. Linders looked. Linders, who had been keeping a quiet running mental log of small irregularities since the chair, walked over to the drawer and looked into it from above without touching it. The drawer contained office supplies, pens, paper clips, a stapler, a half-empty box of staples. Nothing of significance, but the pens, Linders noticed, were arranged. They were lined up parallel along the front edge of the drawer. 8 or 9 pens, all of them oriented the same way, as if someone had taken a moment to organize them. Linders closed the drawer. He told Park they were done with the offices, and he keyed his radio. 2 actual, 2-2. Management suite is clear. No contact. Be advised, we have some indicators that someone may have been in this space recently. Nothing actionable. Continuing the sweep, the CP acknowledged. Linders' team moved on. Park told me, when I spoke with him, that he did not think about the drawer again until much later, and that what bothered him about the drawer was not the arrangement of the pens, but the fact that he had not heard the drawer being opened. He had been in the office adjacent to that one for perhaps 4 minutes before they cleared the fifth office. He had been listening, the way you listen when you are clearing a building. He had not heard anything. You hear drawers, he told me. In a building that quiet, you hear them. Team 3 had drawn the east wing, which was the largest single section of the suite, and which contained the second anchor store, the cinema complex, and the upper-level corridor that connected back to the central atrium. Team 3 was led by a sergeant I will call Halverson. The team included 2 riflemen, one of whom I spoke with extensively. I will call him Mata. Mata is the witness who provided the most detailed account of what happened that night, in part because Mata is, by temperament, a careful describer. He told me he had been a hunter since he was a child, and that hunting teaches you to describe what you actually saw rather than what you think you saw, because the 2 are different and the difference matters. Halverson's team entered the east wing through the upper-level corridor and moved toward the cinema complex first. The cinema had been one of the last tenants to leave the mall before the closure. Its lobby was still partially furnished. A popcorn counter with the popcorn machine removed, but the counter still in place. A ticket booth with the glass intact. A carpeted floor that had not been replaced in years, and that bore the soft impressions of long use. The team cleared the lobby. They moved into the auditorium corridor. There were 6 auditoriums, 3 on each side. They cleared them in sequence, each man taking a different angle, the way you clear small rooms with a small team. In the 4th auditorium, Mata noticed that one of the seats in the back row was folded down. Cinema seats are spring-loaded. They fold up when no one is sitting in them. All of the other seats in the auditorium were folded up. The seat in the back row on the aisle was folded down. Mata pointed his weapon-mounted light at the seat. The seat was empty. He moved his light slowly across the rest of the back row. The other seats were folded up. He moved his light across the row in front of the back row. All folded up. He moved his light across the auditorium, row by row, sweeping methodically. All folded up, except the one. He told Halverson. Halverson came back and looked. Halverson stood at the front of the auditorium for perhaps a minute, looking at the single folded-down seat in the back row, and then he walked up the aisle toward it. He reached the seat. He looked at it. He pushed it. The spring engaged, and the seat folded up. Halverson and Mata stood in the back of the auditorium and looked at the now uniform rows of folded-up seats. Could have been like that for a year, Halverson said. Eventually. Could have been, Mata said. Neither of them believed it. Spring-loaded seats do not stay folded down for a year. The spring is designed to overcome gravity. A seat held down for a year would, at minimum, have the spring weakened to the point that it would not snap back the way that seat had just snapped back. They cleared the remaining 2 auditoriums. They were empty. They moved on to the second anchor store. The second anchor was a former department store, 2 stories, with the interior escalators frozen in place and the display floor mostly empty. The team cleared the ground level first. Empty. They moved up the frozen escalator to the second level. The second level had been the home goods section. It still had display furniture, couches, dining sets, bedroom suites, arranged in the loose room tableaus that department stores use to display furniture. The arrangements had been disturbed at some point during the closure process, so that some pieces were pushed against the walls and others were stacked. But the overall effect was still of a series of small stage rooms. Mata was clearing the west side of the second level when he saw, in his peripheral vision, that something on the east side of the floor had changed. He turned his head. He could not tell immediately what had changed. The display floor looked the same as it had looked 30 seconds earlier. Couches in the same places, lamps in the same places, a bedroom set against the far wall, with the bed made and the pillows arranged. He raised his light and swept it slowly across the east side of the floor. The bedroom set against the far wall had the bed made. The pillows were arranged. There was a fold in the comforter near the center of the bed that ran in a long, shallow depression from the head of the bed to the foot. Mata is, again, a careful describer. He told me he did not see anything on the bed. He told me he did not see anything move. He told me what he saw was a fold in the comforter of a shape and depth consistent with the recent presence of a body of approximately adult size lying on its side. He stood and looked at the bed for perhaps 15 seconds. He did not raise his weapon. He did not call out. He told me, when I asked him why, that he had the very strong sense in that moment that calling out would be a mistake. It's like when you're hunting, he told me, and you know there's something to brush, and you know it knows you're there, and you both have a kind of agreement that as long as nobody moves, nothing has to happen. That's what it felt like an agreement. He stood for 15 seconds. He lowered his light slowly so that the beam moved off the bed and onto the floor. He turned his body slowly toward the escalator. He walked, at a normal pace, back toward Halverson, who was clearing the east side of the floor and who had not seen any of it. He did not tell Halverson about the bed. He told me, when I asked him why, that he could not at that point have told Halverson without raising his voice above a normal speaking volume, and he had the same strong sense that raising his voice would be a mistake. They finished the sweep of the second level. They descended the frozen escalator. They cleared the rest of the east wing. They reported back to the CP at 0015, approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes after step-off. The CP logged the sweep as complete. No contact. No findings of operational significance. The 3 teams returned to the central atrium within 20 minutes of each other. The atrium, at that hour, was lit by the soft sodium glow of the building's reduced overnight lighting and by the cooler white of a few portable work lamps the platoon had set up near the CP. The men coming off the sweep stripped their gear, drew water, and sat. There was a low murmur of conversation, the kind that always follows a long routine task. But it was quieter than usual. None of the team leaders went to the CP immediately. They sat with their men first. Reyes, the medic, was in the atrium throughout this period. He told me he noticed the quietness before he noticed anything else. They came back wrong, he said. Not scared, not jumpy, just quiet, like they'd all just heard the same bad news, but nobody had told them what it was. The platoon sergeant came down from the CP around 0045 to take the team leader's reports. He took them one at a time, in the CP, with the door closed. He took Boyd's first, then Linders's, then Halverson's. Each report took perhaps 10 minutes. When Halverson came out of the CP, the platoon sergeant came out behind him and stood at the railing of the second deck. Looking down into the atrium, Reyes was watching him. The platoon sergeant stood at the railing for a long time. Then he went back into the CP and closed the door. 20 minutes later, the platoon sergeant came back out, descended to the atrium, and ordered a 4th sweep. This was unusual. 4th sweeps are not standard. The men who had just come off the 3rd sweep were not assigned to it. The platoon sergeant took 6 men who had been resting, 2 fire teams worth, and led the sweep himself. He took the route that combined all 3 previous sectors. He moved fast. The sweep took 40 minutes. He came back. He did not say what he had found. He went to the CP. He closed the door. The men in the atrium did not ask. They went to sleep, or they pretended to. Mata told me that he did not sleep that night. He lay on his cot in the atrium, beneath the skylights, and he looked up through the skylights at the sky, which was overcast and lit faintly orange by the city light, reflecting off the cloud cover. He told me that at some point in the small hours of the morning, he became aware that someone was looking at him. He did not turn his head. He had, again, the strong sense that turning his head would be a mistake. He lay on the cot and looked up at the skylights and listened. He could hear the breathing of the men around him. He could hear the soft hum of the reduced power circuit. He could hear, very faintly, the click of the building's structural metal contracting in the cool of the night. He could not hear anyone looking at him, but he knew, the way you know in a dark room that someone has entered, that he was being looked at. The sensation lasted, by his estimate, perhaps 4 minutes. Then it stopped. He told me. He could not say what stopped it. He told me he did not feel relieved when it stopped, because the absence of the feeling did not feel like the thing leaving. It felt like the thing deciding to look at something else. He fell asleep some time after that. He did not remember falling asleep. The platoon spent the next day on the downtown perimeter rotation. They were out of the building from approximately 0800 to approximately 2000. The day was uneventful in the operational sense. The unrest in the city had been declining for several days, and the perimeter rotations were largely a matter of standing in formation and waiting. The men did not talk about the previous night. During the day, Reyes told me he tried, once, to bring it up with Park, who was on the same vehicle with him during a movement. Park looked at him briefly and shook his head. Reyes did not bring it up again. The platoon returned to the mall at 20:30. They ate, they cleaned weapons, and they began bedding down. The platoon sergeant did not order another sweep that night. He did, however, do something that Reyes told me he had never seen platoon sergeant do before in 9 years of service together. He posted an interior guard. Interior guards are not standard for a building like that, in a deployment like that. The exterior of the building was guarded. The entrances were controlled. There was no doctrinal reason for an interior guard, and the platoon sergeant did not give one. He simply added the post to the duty roster with a 2-hour rotation, and the post was located at the second deck railing of the central atrium, with a clear line of sight down both wings. The interior guard ran every night for the remaining 6 nights of the deployment. I asked all 4 of the men I spoke with whether the interior guard ever reported anything. 3 of them said they did not know. Mata, who pulled the interior guard twice during the remaining 6 nights, told me he did not report anything either of his rotations. I asked him whether he had observed anything. He thought about the question for a long time before he answered. I observed, he said finally, that the building was being good. I asked him what he meant. I mean it was being still, he said, like it knew it was being watched, like it was waiting for us to leave. I want to be careful here not to overextend the story beyond what the men actually told me. But there are 2 pieces of context that I think are worth including, because they affect how the men have understood the night in the years since. The first is the building itself. The mall, like most American shopping malls of its generation, was built in the late 1970s on what had previously been undeveloped land at the edge of a small city. The land had no remarkable history. It had been farmland before it had been undeveloped, and before that it had been timber, and before that it had been the same kind of mixed prairie and woodland that the rest of the region had been. There is no Indian burial ground. There is no plague pit. There is no story. What the building did have, however, was a history of staff complaints during its operational years. Reyes, who is a curious man and who spent some time after the deployment looking into the building's history, found a small local news article from approximately 12 years before the closure, in which night shift janitorial staff at the mall had filed an informal complaint with their employer about feeling watched while cleaning the upper concourses after closing. The complaint did not name a cause. It did not allege any specific incident. It was, in the article, presented as a kind of mild human interest curiosity that small-town newspapers occasionally run on slow days. The mall's management had responded to complaint by adjusting the cleaning schedule so that janitorial staff worked in pairs rather than alone. That was the entirety of the public record. No reports of intruders. No reports of unauthorized entries. No security footage that anyone could find, and the security system in the mall had been disconnected when the building closed. The second piece of context is the building's fate. The mall was demolished in stages, beginning approximately 2 years after the guard deployment. The demolition was not connected to the deployment in any way that I've been able to establish. The site is currently a mixed-use development, with a grocery store, a number of smaller retail tenants, and a residential apartment block on what was previously the East Anchor's footprint. I drove past the site once while researching the story. I did not stop. I'm not sure why I did not stop. I told myself at the time that I did not stop because there was nothing to see. The buildings on the site are new. The landscape is new. The asphalt is new. There is no trace of the mall. But I will tell you, honestly, that the reason I did not stop was that as I approached the site, I had the same sense that Mata described to me of an agreement that as long as nobody moved, nothing had to happen. I drove past at the speed limit. I did not look directly at the apartment block. And when I was past the site, I felt the same thing that Mata felt the morning after the sweep. Not relief, because the feeling of being looked at did not feel like it had ended. It felt like the looker had simply decided to look at something else. What happened in that building? I do not know. The men who were there do not know. The platoon sergeant, who I attempted to contact through one of the other men, declined to speak with me. He is retired now. He gave a short message through the intermediary, which the intermediary relayed to me with some hesitation. The message was, "Tell him the sweep was clean. Tell him I posted the guard because the men were tired. Tell him there is nothing else to say." I take him at his word, in the sense that I believe he believes it. I have seen this pattern before in interviews with senior NCOs who were present for things that they cannot operationally afford to have happened. The institutional language is not deception. It is a form of structural maintenance. The unit cannot function if the platoon sergeant tells the truth about what he saw on the fourth sweep, and so the platoon sergeant does not tell the truth. He tells, instead, the version of the truth that allows the unit to continue. This is not cowardice. It is a kind of administrative grace. But I will note one detail that the platoon sergeant's message contained, which I do not believe he intended to contain. He said the men were tired. The men were not tired. The deployment was 9 days in. The rotations had been light, and the men had been sleeping reasonably well until that night. The platoon sergeant, if he had wanted to give an operationally clean reason for the interior guard, would have said the men were uneasy, or the men reported anomalies, or I had concerns about facility security. He said tired, which is a word a senior NCO uses when he is trying to make a decision sound less significant than it was. He posted the guard because of what he saw on the fourth sweep. I am confident of this. I am not confident of what he saw. I asked Mata once whether he had any theory about it, and Mata said the only theory he had was that the platoon sergeant had gone up to the second deck of the East Anchor and looked at the bed and seen the fold and the comforter. I asked Mata whether he thought the fold was still there. Mata said he did not know. He said he had not gone back to look. He said he thought at the time that the fold had been there because something had been lying on the bed, and that something had not necessarily left the bed, and that if the platoon sergeant had looked at the bed and the fold had still been there, then nothing had changed. And if the fold had not been there, then something had moved. He told me he was not sure which of those two possibilities would have been worse. The platoon completed the remaining 6 nights of the deployment without incident. The interior guard was posted every night. No interior guard ever reported a contact. The men slept beneath the skylights in the central atrium, and they did not discuss the sweep among themselves. On the morning of the 15th day, the platoon was relieved by a follow-on unit and moved out of the building. Reyes told me that as they were loading vehicles in the parking lot, several of the men turned on their own and looked back at the building before they boarded the trucks. He told me he did not know what they were looking for. He told me he turned and looked too. He told me the building looked the same as it had looked on the morning they had arrived. The skylights, the closed entrances, the empty parking lot, nothing in any window, nothing on any roof. But he told me that as he was looking at the building, he had the strong sense that the building was looking back, and that the looking was not hostile, and that the looking was not curious, and that the looking was something closer to the way a man at a train station watches a train pull away, without urgency, without regret, with the calm patience of something that knew it would see other trains. He boarded his truck. The convoy departed. The follow-on unit cleared the building again, and the standard re-clear and reported nothing. The deployment continued for another 11 days under the follow-on unit, and concluded without further incident. The building was returned to the property management company that held it. 18 months later, it was demolished. The after-action report for the platoon's deployment contains no reference to any of the events of the second sweep. The radio logs contain the calls from each team leader. In the words I have given them, no interpretive note accompanies the logs. The interior guard appears on the duty roster as atrium overwatch, 2-hour rotations, with no further explanation. The men, as far as I am aware, have not been together in the same room since the deployment ended. They are scattered across 3 states. 2 of them are still in the guard. 2 have left. None of them, when I asked, expressed any desire to return to the city where the deployment occurred. None of them expressed any particular fear of doing so. They simply, when asked, said that they had no reason to go back. I have thought, over the course of writing this, about what makes this story stay with the men who lived it, when so many other strange nights in so many other strange buildings do not. I think it is this. The men were not frightened in the moment, in the way that men are frightened by a clear threat. They were not under fire. They were not in danger of injury. The sweep was, by any operational metric, uneventful. The platoon sergeant could write, and did write, that the sweep was clean and he would not be lying. What the men experienced, instead, was a slow accumulation of small wrongnesses that did not individually amount to anything, and that collectively amounted to the certain knowledge that they were not alone in the building. A turned mannequin, a warm chair, a drawer that opened without sound, a folded-down seat, a fold and a comforter. None of these things alone would justify a report. All of them, together, did not justify a report either, because there was nothing to report, no contact, no description, no actionable intelligence. Only the accumulating sense that the building was occupied by something that knew the men were there, that was watching them, and that had no particular intention of revealing itself. The horror of that night, if it is horror, is not the horror of a presence. It is a horror of attention, the horror of being observed by someone that does not need to act, because it is satisfied simply to look. The men went back to work the next day. They finished the deployment. They came home. They went on with their lives. The building was demolished, and the site was redeveloped, and the new tenants of the apartment block on the east anchor footprint sleep, presumably without incident. But I will tell you that the 4 men I spoke with in the conversations I had with them all did the same thing at some point during our interviews, without any of them knowing that the others had done it. They each, at some point during our conversation, looked over their own shoulder, not in alarm, not in fear, just a glance. The way a man glances over his shoulder when he is in a public place, and he has the soft, unprovoked sense that someone behind him has been looking at him for a while. Each of them, when he did it, did not seem to notice he had done it. None of them remarked on it. None of them, I am sure, would remember doing it if I described a moment to them now. But I noticed, and I have thought since, that whatever was in that building did not stay in that building. Or perhaps that it never needed a building in the first place. Perhaps it only needed the men, and the building was simply where it happened to find them. I do not know. I do not think the men know either. But somewhere in 3 states, for men occasionally glance over their shoulders for no reason they could name, and then they go on with whatever they were doing. And that, I think, is a part of the story that I cannot stop turning over my mind. Not what was in the mall, but what came out of it.